Hello, everybody. Pastor Kevin Swann here again, and we're at the end of our study on the book of Ruth. We've done chapters 1 and chapter 2, and today we're going to combine chapters 3 and 4 in this video. This is a powerful book on relationships and how God moves and works behind the scenes, and we also get a real good demonstration of how Christ relates to the church and how the church should also relate to Christ. I'm excited about this Bible study. I hope you've been over this entire series. And so we need you now to go ahead and read chapters 3 and 4 of Ruth. Also download the Bible study sheet if you want to have that with you. Once you've done both, let's get started with Ruth chapters 3 and 4.
We're ready to get started with Ruth chapters 3 and 4 for today. Remember the book of Ruth, and there's some goals that we want to make sure that we accomplish in this series as we're reading through the book of Ruth. I want to make sure that we understand and see how God works in our lives behind the scenes. Many times we don't always believe nor sense that God is present with us, but there are a lot of times that God is doing things that we have no idea of, we're not aware of, we don't understand nor comprehend, but we have to trust that God is doing that. Also, especially for times when we are going through difficult moments, despairing times, we really have to trust and believe that God has a plan for us. It's difficult, I understand. A lot of times when we're going through hard times, our focus is on the immediate situation, but we have to learn how to think bigger picture, because God is much bigger than the current situation that we're facing. He's bigger than that broken relationship. He's bigger than the divorce. He's bigger than any of the things that we might have to deal with. And so we have to understand that from God's perspective, His plan is bigger than our moments of despair. We also want to see how Christian relationships should be handled. Last session, I hope you looked at it, we talked about Boaz and what Boaz really did for Ruth and how he was willing to show her that on certain levels he was committed to her and to her well-being. And that should be a sign for men and for women. If you're looking for a long-term relationship, there ought to be certain things in place that you look at, that you make sure you're doing and can see before you decide to move further. And then the last one is to see the kindness of God. God is clearly kind through Boaz. He's kind through how God orchestrates everything that happens in the book. And even though this is a short book, it's a powerful book to see that God is not just some judgmental God. I think a lot of people, when they look at the Old Testament in particular, we think that God is some judgmental, harsh tyrant type of God, but that God really is a kind and merciful and gentle and loving God. And we see that no more clearly than how God redeems His people, which means to buy them back. And I hope that we can get these things accomplished as we go through. A quick overview of chapter 1. Remember that there is a family, a man, a wife, and 2 boys. They leave Bethlehem, which literally means house of bread, to go to a foreign land because of a famine there. And while in Moab, the wife / mother loses her husband and her 2 sons. We know the mother's name is Naomi. The husband's name is Elimelech. The 2 sons are Mahlon and Chilion. They all die. Naomi decides she wants to go back home to Bethlehem after 10 years. She has 2 daughters-in-law by this time. One of the daughters-in-law is named Orpah, the other is named Ruth. Orpah decides to stay in Moab, and Ruth decides she wants to go back to Bethlehem with Naomi. And upon getting back to Bethlehem, Naomi, whose name literally means pleasant or lovable, now she says, don't call me that, but call me Mara, which means bitter. It doesn't take much for us to have bitter experiences, and that's what we see happening at the end of chapter 1. Then chapter 2, when they get back to Bethlehem, we understand that they don't have a covering. They don't have husbands. They're both widows. They're poor. They don't have anybody to provide. So Ruth decides to go out into the fields and see if she can glean some food so that they can eat. Now, what are the chances? And it just so happens that of all the fields that Ruth could have went to, that she happens to go to the field of a man named Boaz, who's the owner of the field. And Boaz means alacrity, or it means cheerful readiness. I'm ready to help in a time of need. Upon figuring out and finding out who Ruth is, Boaz begins to show favor to Ruth because he had heard about Ruth's faithfulness to Naomi and also to Naomi's God. Remember, Ruth 1:16 and 17 are critical. Ruth tells Naomi, I'm going to go where you go. Your God is going to be my God. Your people are going to be my people. And this is going to happen till our death. Boaz gets all the details, hears about the faithfulness of this foreign woman, and decides to bless her. So in one day, Ruth leaves the house. She has nothing. She comes back, and Boaz has supplied her with 1.5 months of food. All I'm trying to tell you is that God can work behind the scenes to put you in the right place at the right time and connect you to the right people so that you can receive the blessings and favor of God. What we also know about the book of Ruth, and this is critical to understand, is that Boaz is a type of Christ. And Ruth is a type of the church or the body of believers. So not only should we look at this book as an example of how Boaz and Ruth got along, but we should also look at this book in reference to how Christ loves the church and how the church also loves Christ. That is very important to understand. It is more than just Boaz and Ruth, the persons. They are also symbolic of something bigger. Now, when we get to chapter 3, and I hope you've read it by now, and if you haven't read it, please take a moment to do so before you go any further. By this point, we need to understand what Boaz represents in the text. He represents what is called a kinsman redeemer. That title is important not only for us to understand the role of Boaz as he relates to Ruth, but it is also important in understanding how Christ is a kinsman redeemer to us, those who belong to him. Now, let's break this down. Kinsman redeemer, there are two words there. The first one is kinsman, and the first syllable of kinsman is kin. And we know what a kin folk are. A kinsman is a person who's a close relative. That's what a kinsman is. We have cousins and uncles and aunts and nephews and nieces and all those kinds of things. Those are kinsmen, close relatives. Well, a redeemer is also a person who buys back. Now, what's important to understand in Jewish custom during this time was that it was the right and responsibility of the kinsman, the close relative, to keep the property or land in the family when there was no heir to pass it on to. Now remember, Naomi's husband had died and her sons had died. Therefore, she has no heir for the land that is in her immediate family. What she needs is a kinsman redeemer to, first of all, buy the land on behalf of Naomi so that the land can stay in the family's possession. This is very important to understand. So at first, Naomi needs a kinsman redeemer. But then what she also realizes is that Boaz can be a redeemer of sorts for Ruth as well, because Boaz is not married and neither is Ruth. And one of the things that Naomi wanted to make sure that Ruth had was a covering or a protection so that she would not be a young widow. So understand now that Boaz is being seen in this context as killing two birds with one stone. Not only is he going to be the kinsman redeemer for Naomi so that the land can stay in the family, but he's also going to be a kinsman redeemer for Ruth so that she isn't lost as well and have to deal with widows' different situations and struggles. So the plan that Naomi has for Ruth is this. Go put your best outfit on, go down to the threshing floor, and wait until Boaz is finished eating and drinking. And when he lies down, I want you to go lay at his feet, uncover the blanket where he is, stay there, and then he will tell you what to do. Now, if there was ever a theme that should run through the book of Ruth, it is the obedience of Ruth. Because we see clearly and consistently through all the chapters that Ruth was obedient to God and also obedient to Naomi. And what we see here is that Ruth willingly obeyed all of Naomi's words. But now I need you to think about this, because this is not as easy as it may seem to be. Ruth was instructed to put her best outfit on. To, as a matter of fact, put on some good smelling perfume. Go down to the threshing floor. The threshing floor was not a neat or clean space. As a matter of fact, it was a dirty space because they were winnowing grain and barley and all kinds of stuff was on the floor. And while it was a time of celebration because of the grain harvest, it wasn't a clean place to be. Boaz also didn't sleep at home. Now think about this. He was wealthy, but yet he stained by his harvest because he needed to protect it from being stolen. But yet and still, in spite of all of this, Ruth obeyed Naomi's instruction. So she put on her best outfit. She goes in, she notices Boaz, she observes him, she watches for when he goes to sleep, and then she lays down at his feet. The Bible says that Boaz woke up in the middle of the night and was startled that Ruth was there. Didn't know who Ruth was at the time, and asked, "Who was it?" And Ruth responded, "It is me." And now we have some interaction. Before I get to the next slide, though, I want women to understand this very important point. You know, for a long-term situation, that this person is right for you when you're willing to lay at the feet. Laying at the feet is a critical concept to understand, and I'm going to get to it later. But women, wives, girlfriends, whomever, the relationship is not going to work the way God intended if you're not willing to lay at the feet. And so many times, there's so many disagreements, there are power struggles, there are all kinds of things that go on, but the willing response of the woman ought to be to lay at the feet. Now, I'm going to come back to that. The key to what Ruth asked is significant, and Ruth chapter 3, verse number 9 is one of the most important verses in the chapter. Boaz in verse 8 is startled because he finds that Ruth is at his feet. Boaz says, "What do you want from me?" Ruth says, "I need a covering." This is how you know, ladies, that the man that you're with is for you. What Ruth was really saying is, I am willing to come under your wing if you will allow me to. That's what I really need. It's not necessarily about money. It's not necessarily about that. I just need to come under your wing to know that you're going to be my shelter. You're going to be my provider. You're going to be my source of protection. This is one of the main reasons, ladies, how you know that this person, whomever you're with, is for you. Because she's clearly indicating, I need you to be my kinsman redeemer. I need you to take care of me. I need you to be with me. I need you to make sure that you are providing the necessary covering that I lost when my husband passed away. Now notice her position. She's at his feet when this request was made, which means that this is a sign of submission. Now, ladies, I know submission is a dirty word to a lot of you. I know that people say nowadays, you know, you ain't got to submit and you ain't got to do all these things. And, you know, we get into all these things. You're your own woman. You make your own money. You got your own living. You got your own Coach purse. You got your own BMW. You got your own nice house. You have all of these things. Why would I want to submit? But understand that submission does not mean that you are inferior. Submission does not mean that you're less than. Submission does not mean that you're secondary. Submission means that you're willing to lay at the feet. You're willing to align yourself with your husband or your husband-to-be or whomever you're with. And if you're not willing to lay at his feet, then that one is not for you. If you're not willing to put the sword down and willing to lie at his feet, that one isn't for you. And let me tell you how I know this is true, because when you read Luke chapter 10, I want you to read this a little bit later. There's a story that Jesus gives in Luke chapter 10 between Mary and Martha. And as the story goes, Martha and Mary and Jesus are in a house. Martha is steadily busy, going around, doing all these chores and doing all these things. Mary decides, I'm going to sit at the feet of Jesus. Martha is disappointed in Mary. And as a matter of fact, she's frustrated in Mary because she thinks that Mary should be getting up and doing work with her. She's so frustrated that she tells Jesus, Jesus, will you please tell Mary to get up because I need some help. Jesus says to Martha that Mary is in the better position than you are. This is a very important point to understand. So many times when it comes to looking for people and looking for mates, we always measure them by what they are doing. But sometimes you have to be in a place and in a position of receiving and being in a place of vulnerability and being in a place of humility that also indicates that you're in the right place. Mary, in the context of Jesus, was at the feet because she indicated, I'm in submission to you and to your will. I'm in submission to doing what you have asked for me to do, and I don't mind being under your wing. Ladies, the same thing is true in a relationship with a man. If you're not willing to be in a place where you're willing to lay at his feet, then it's not going to work. It's simply not going to work. If you're not willing to be at a place where you understand that you need a covering, that you need him to take you under the wing, that you all can grow together, but you also understand that you need to be aligned with him, not ahead of him, but aligned with him, then that's going to work. And I find so many women who want to make men be something that they're not. And you're trying to force him to be something that they're not. And so you're pulling more weight than you are required to pull, and more weight than they deserve. And so, again, if he's not at the place, if you're not at the place in your heart where you're willing to do that, he's not the one. Now, notice this. Ruth asked the question, let me come up under your wing. Notice how Boaz responds. He responds, I will be glad to cover you and to marry you because of two things. Verses 10 and 11. Look at it with me. Verse 10, it says, you didn't go after younger men, whether they were rich or poor. But number two, this is the most important thing. Because you have a reputation of good character in the community. Everywhere I go, people speak positively of your name. Now, ladies, I'm going to give you a point right here that I need you to understand. Most women believe that if you just feed him and sex him, that you will be able to keep him. That is not true. A man will take your food and your body and still leave you at the same time. If you want somebody to be in your life long term, it is not because of your food or your body. It's going to be because of your character. If a man does not feel comfortable with you in public, if he feels like being with you minimizes his own reputation, or he feels disrespected in some way because your character is not in the right place, he's not going to want to deal with you publicly. He will call you at night. He will call you at midnight. He'll call you at 1 in the morning. He'll tell you he'll come over to your house, but don't expect that he will be taking you out in public during the day. Why? Because he doesn't view your reputation as being that way. And while you're giving him all the food and while you're giving him all the loving and he doesn't respect your reputation, you're not going to keep him. What made Boaz go after Ruth and be willing to do anything for Ruth, if you look at the text carefully, one, it does not suggest anywhere in the text that Boaz was even drunk. It said that he was in good spirits. Number two, it does not suggest at all that Ruth laid at Boaz's feet for a sexual favor. She laid at his feet for submission, not for sex. And when Boaz recognized the character that was in Ruth, he was willing to go above and beyond the call of duty to meet her needs. Character has everything to deal with how you handle him, how he is seen, how he feels about being seen with you in public, how he feels about how you take care of him and the things that are going on. Notice some of the qualities of a virtuous woman. Proverbs 31, ladies, you need to read it every now and again. I'm just going to pick out a few. Number one, the price of a virtuous woman is far above rubies. In other words, there are a lot of women out here who have low standards and a bad reputation, but a good woman, one of good reputation, one of good quality, her price is far above rubies. Number two, the heart of her husband safely trusts her. This is so key. If you don't get anything else from this Bible study, ladies, please let me help you to understand something. It is not in a man's playbook to give away his heart often. What you do with it when he gives it to you, how you treat it, how you nurture it, is going to be of tremendous benefit to him. I see and hear of so many girlfriends and so many wives publicly disrespecting their husbands by talking about what they're not doing, what they're not good at, don't never do. And you're trashing your husband, your boo, whomever in public. And I will tell you this, If you continue to trash him publicly, he will not give his heart to you any longer. He will shut down on you. He may stay with you, but he'll never be emotionally vested in you again. And then you're wondering, how come he's not connected to me? How come he don't take me out anymore? How come he doesn't treat me the same? How come he doesn't share himself? Because the last time you did it, you destroyed his heart, and he's not going to be willing to do that again. A virtuous woman, a woman of good character, is one whose heart the man safely trusts. If a man can trust you with his heart, you have good character. Notice, this has nothing to do with your body. This is long term. You could give him all the sex you want, but if you don't take care of his heart, he ain't gonna stick around. Does her husband good and not evil all her life. And also her children call her blessed, and her husband also praises her. Notice what is going on here. These are some of the qualities of a virtuous woman. And because Boaz saw this in Ruth, not because of her body, not because of what she fed him, but because she had virtuous qualities, and because her price was far above rubies, Boaz was willing and able to help meet Ruth's request. What I'm trying to get women to understand is that your body's not going to keep him. What you cook for him is not going to keep him. Your look is not even going to keep him. It's your character that's going to keep him long term. I'm trying to help somebody in relationship here. So at the end of chapter 3, here's what we have. Boaz says, I'm willing to help you, Ruth, and I'll be even willing to marry you. But according to Jewish law, there is a family member that is closer than I am. So by right, I have to go to that family member first, ask them if they want to redeem Naomi's land, and then get back with you. If that family member is not willing to do it, then I will be glad to do it for you. So Boaz, after this conversation at night, sends her back home with 6 ephahs of barley, 60 pounds of food. Now remember, the day before, she had 1.5 months of food. Now she goes back home again, and she's got 60 pounds of food. I'm just trying to tell you that when God works in your favor and things are not going according to plan, God still has a way of stepping in and moving behind the scenes. Ruth returns home in the morning. No evidence of sex took place. She came home with 60 pounds of food, and Ruth told Naomi everything that happened. And Naomi said in verse number 18, wait here and watch that Boaz is going to take everything and work everything out. Just be patient, and he'll work everything out. That's chapter 3. When we get into chapter 4, Boaz, it says in the first few verses of chapter 4 that he finds the nearest relative, and he gets with 10 elders, and they sit down, and Boaz says, listen, there's Naomi. Naomi's husband has died. I need you to buy or redeem the land to keep it in the family. Initially, the family member agreed to redeem the land. Boaz also said, though, however, there's a stipulation. If you redeem the land, then you also need to redeem and marry Ruth, who came with Naomi from Moab. Well, when the family member heard that, family member said, no, I can't marry Ruth. I'll take the land, but I don't want to marry Ruth. So Boaz said, no, it's a package deal. They both come together. So the family member said, I won't do it. You can have the land, and you can also have Ruth. The Bible says that the way they made agreements is by taking off a sandal. So they both took off a sandal. They exchanged the sandal. That was a sign that the deal had been done, and it was done in the presence of the elders. Now notice this. After the agreement, and then Ruth goes to Boaz, the elders of the city start prophesying over Boaz and Ruth. What gets me here is that Ruth is a foreigner. And yet, because of her obedience and because of her faithfulness and because of her willingness to be in certain places and her character, the elders of the town who are Hebrew start prophesying over a foreign woman as if she was in the family line. May she be like Rachel and Leah. May she be like Tamar in Judah. I'm just trying to tell you, ladies, that there's something about character and obedience and submission that allows blessing and favor over your life. And just let me help you understand. I know submission is a bad term. Submission only works when you submit to the right one. She was willing to submit because Boaz was the right one. If you submit to the wrong one, it's not going to work. But you got to find out the right one to submit to. Here's what we also see. Boaz decides to marry Ruth. Ruth gets pregnant. Naomi, remember, she was bitter, but now Ruth has a son. And now Naomi's joy has come back full circle. Then after that, Boaz and Ruth named their son Obed, which means serving. The best part of all, Obed is the grandfather of King David. What are the chances that a Moabite woman would come back to a foreign land, connect with a man who owns a field, who happens to be a relative, who happens to be willing to be their kinsman redeemer, who they happen to get pregnant and get married, who happens to be Obed, who happens to be the grandfather of King David? All I'm trying to tell you, if you're watching this video, is that God continually works behind the scenes of your life. But that's not even the best part about it. When you look at the ancestry of Jesus, in Matthew chapter 1, Matthew writes the genealogy to prove that Jesus is of Jewish descent. And look at what he says in verse number 5. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, get this, whose mother was Ruth. Ruth is in the family descendant ancestry of Jesus the Christ, a foreigner. But because of her obedience, because of her character, because of her virtue, Christ is connected to Ruth, the Moabitess. I just hope somebody understands this. And if you don't get anything else, please get this. God worked all of this out over a 10-year period because God already knew that Boaz and Ruth had to be together. So he had to get Elimelech from Bethlehem to Moab. Elimelech dies, Mahlon dies, Chilion dies. Got to get Naomi and Ruth from Moab back to Bethlehem. Got to make sure that Ruth and Boaz meet. Got to make sure that Ruth goes back and tells Naomi all that happened. All I'm trying to tell you is that sometimes what God does takes a while to work out. It took 10 years for this to be worked out. Some of you right now, you're discouraged, but you're only in year number 5. I want to encourage you. God is still working things out. Some of you might be in year number 8. I just want to encourage you. You still got 2 years to go. God is still working everything out. And at the end of whatever God has designed for your life, I guarantee you that the latter will be better than the first. Now, notice this. Boaz was to Ruth what Christ is to the church. I know that's a SAT kind of thing, but think of it like this. Boaz treated Ruth in the same way Christ treats the church. So when we look at Christ, we also look at Christ as our kinsman redeemer. Why? Because number one, he is our close relative as well, because we all come from the line of Adam. And the Bible says that Christ is a second Adam. Number two, what others couldn't do, Christ willingly stepped in to do. Another relative could have taken the land and could have married Ruth, but that family member wasn't willing to do so. And all I'm telling you is, aren't you glad that what others aren't willing to do, Christ came down, died on the cross, was buried, crucified, and rose on the third day with all power in his hand. Because why? He is our kinsman redeemer. And what the purchase price for our redemption was the blood of Jesus Christ. Like Ruth then, the church or the body of believers, if we don't do anything else, we should be wanting and willing to sit at the feet of Christ. We should be submissive to Christ and his teachings, be obedient, have good character, just like Ruth, and allow Christ to take us under his wing so that the blessings and favor of God should be worked out in our life just as it was in Ruth. Finally, I just want to remind you of this, because Boaz is a type of Christ. Boaz's name means cheerful readiness. Christ is always willing to save those who want it. Boaz was wealthy. Christ created the heavens and the earth. Boaz had a plan for Ruth. Christ has a plan for mankind. I just want you to see. And the last one is, Boaz was Naomi and Ruth's kinsman redeemer, and Christ is ours as well. What a wonderful book of Ruth. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a great book, not just to demonstrate the love between two people, but also to see and demonstrate the love that Christ has for the church, and how the church should also have the same kind of love and submission and willing spirit to Christ. God bless you.
I really hope that this series on the book of Ruth has helped you to understand relationships better, understand God better, know what to look for as you're dealing with people, what men should be striving for in a Boaz, and how Ruth's submission and her character, her obedience is what won Boaz over and gave her favor in a foreign land. There's so many nuggets, so many great blessings in the book of Ruth. We certainly didn't cover them all, but hopefully we gave you enough that you would want to go back and read it again and again. I'd like to hear from you to know what you think about these Bible study series. We've done others, not just Ruth. We've done Ephesians. We've done Acts. We'd love to hear from you. Send us an email, info, at ivybaptistchurch.org. I'd love to hear from you. I certainly will respond. If there's a book that we haven't done and you think will be beneficial, you would like to see us do, go ahead and drop us a line and let us know. But thank you so much for watching these video series. We really appreciate it. And until the next time, be blessed and take care.